Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com.
Hello and welcome to SciTech Culture, the show where we discuss science, technology and culture in its myriad of forms. My name is Ben Warner and I'm joined once again by my good friend and colleague Steve Kern. How are we today, Steve? Ready to be nostalgic about 2015?
I am Ben. Hello. Hi, everyone. Yes, it's Back to the Future Day, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you who I'm sure you would have known by now because they've been doing a lot of publicity over it, on Wednesday, 21st of October 2015 is the day that we're going to see Marty and Doc just magically appear in their DeLorean from 1985. Of course, we're referring here to Back to the Future Part 2, the film from 1989 that made all sorts of interesting futuristic predictions about what our future would be like. We're going to talk a bit about that and how close it got to actually being real. Obviously, there are a lot of things in there that didn't quite make it. But, well, let's start there then. We were just saying before we get into that, we were talking before we got on about the fact that, I remember going into the cinema to watch it and I really loved the first film and I was really excited to go into the cinema and watch this thing. And like at the time, 1989, that was, an eon ago, especially in terms of the technological advances of it over the last 26 years. Yeah. And it just felt like everything they showed probably would end up happening. 2015 seemed like such a long time away. And of course, here we are. We've arrived, and it just brings a lot of good memories of that time, especially the films that were made and all that sort of thing. So it was just an awesome time.
Yeah, it was a great era, and I remember the original was 1985, which was 1 year after 1984 was set, and everyone had the year precedingly, spoken about whether or not Orwell got it right and all that sort of thing, and maybe today we think 30 years on, Orwell has got it right.
Yeah.
So maybe another 30 years and Back to the Future 2015, 2045 will be right. Who knows?
Exactly. I mean, some of the obvious things that Back to the Future 2 didn't get right, obviously we don't have flying cars, we don't have hoverboards, we don't have power laces, we don't have bizarre fashion. I love the two ties that Marty was, the old Marty was wearing in the future. This was done before the internet took off, so there's no reference really to the internet. There's no, so you don't see like mobile devices the way it is there, but thumbprint scanners are there. They've got retinal scanners there.
Flat
screens, like there's the scene where old Marty's arguing with his boss in the living room. We have those size screens in our living rooms now.
That's right. That would have been amazing. Well, I remember thinking it was amazing back then.
Yeah, and that's right, because we had those tiny box CRT TVs back then, and we thought 50 centimeter TV was like big or whatever. So yeah, it's just amazing. There's, I think, automation, there's a certain level of that's sort of come through. We don't have self-walking dogs or anything like, the leash that walks the dog or anything like that. But, there is some things around, automation that are there. Eyewear. Now, there was that scene where Marty's son, I think, was wearing like a Google Glass type contraption in the dining room scene, which is interesting. And, obviously Microsoft's got its HoloLens as well that it's coming out with, but obviously not quite to the extent of what they've got there. It was just, and obviously we didn't get a Jaws 19, but then you could argue that, the endless sequels, remakes, and other rip-offs that Hollywood do amount to the same thing.
I think that was pretty accurate.
And no Cafe 80s, unfortunately. No sort of waxing nostalgic about the 1980s here.
Well, I'm surprised we've been saved from a Back to the Future 19. If maybe it had been a film made 10 years later, that's what we'd be seeing.
Well, that's the scary thing. There was talk that they were going to try and remake the original, and thankfully, Robert Zemeckis, the film's director, came out and said over his dead body. And apparently, he either owns the right to stop them from doing it, or he has some sort of stake. Him and his writing partner have the ability to say, no, you can't do that. So that's another interesting thing I think that's changed in Hollywood. Probably George Lucas is probably the best example of this, but there's no way that they would be giving rights like that away today.
No, I think those old school directors really earned them. Their IP, they bought the project, and in those days, they backed the projects themselves very often. Whereas I think you probably find today that, I think as we know, the studio installs a director, controls the deal, controls every aspect of the commercialization. So I don't think there's any hope at all for sorts of deals like Zemeckis might have been on with Back to the Future.
But then again, they're not accepting anything like Zemeckis would have done back in 1985 with Back to the Future anyway. So I guess it doesn't really matter in that respect. Robert Zemeckis actually did come out and say that he wasn't trying to do like 2001 and trying to really speculate as to what the future was. To him, it was all like turning everything into a joke, because he just thought it was so impossible to figure out what it would actually be that he tried to make it funny. And it does have a bit of that. It's only 30 minutes or so of the film that they spend in the future. And he actually has said that he never intended to show the future in a Back to the Future movie, but they ended up doing it because they had to. They wrote themselves into a corner at the end of the first film. So I think he did pretty well. And look, despite the fact that, we're now in 2015 and we're 2 days away from Marty and Doc showing up, the fact that you can still watch the film and it's still very watchable. I mean, maybe, today's generation might find it a bit slow or doesn't have as, the computer shots and what else that are in it, but it's still a very watchable film.
Well, it's still made when films were crafted, truly crafted. And, I think the director Zemeckis goes a long way to doing that. But it's a great story. And while I don't think that the future was ever the whole purpose of the film, the real story is the time paradox.
Yeah.
And from memory, I mean, the time paradoxes have been dealt with in scientific or sci-fi literature for years before that, but I don't think they'd ever been done so well in popular culture.
Yeah.
So it was the first time that we'd ever had a film in real Hollywood mainstream that, explained the time paradox and, going back and meddling in the past would affect the future, and then everything that you'd have to do to try and make that right. And then it's a very human story as well. It's hilarious. Marty goes back and his mum falls for him, and then what happens next? And you've got the whole side play with Biff. You've got the crazy professor and all sorts of things going on, which is a great comedy in where it meddles with history, and that's very funny.
Just moving on from that, the Toyota got Christopher Lloyd and Michael J. Fox to do a couple of ads, sort of commemorating the arrival of Marty and Doc, and they're quite humorous little YouTube videos that the two of them are at a diner and they're talking about each of these things that they saw in the future and whether or not we have them. And I think one of them's like remarking, "Oh yeah, I'm still waiting for the power laces and all that, and whatever else."
Well, apparently Nike are trying to bring them out this year.
And Toyota's got I didn't quite get the exact detail. They were talking about sort of like a Mr. Fusion like device for their turning rubbish into fuel. I'm sure that'll be very useful one day if they ever manage to crack that one. So yeah, it's a great time for all of that, and it's a great time to commemorate that series as well. But if we move on a bit and go closer into the real world now. Probably the closest we'll get to, say, a flying car, even though it's not what they do, is it's more like the idea of the technology behind it.
Yeah.
Is the Sorry.
People have enough trouble driving cars on the ground. Can you imagine? Imagine air crash investigation if they allow cars to fly?
Exactly right. Maybe it just wasn't practical. There you go. Tesla Motors is probably the closest that we get to a futuristic view of motoring in the future. They've got some interesting things there, particularly around like autopilot features, and we've talked about driverless cars before. Yep. They're pioneering obviously, cars that don't rely on fossil fuels to run, and that's really where I think a lot of the interesting things are happening. And I look forward to, this sort of technology becoming a lot more mainstream, where, you wean yourself off the old school and old history, 20th century modes of fueling cars with, this more modern approach.
Yeah. I mean, we're seeing these changes now, and the great thing that I thought they captured in Back to the Future when they went forwards in time was not so much the accuracy, but that the place was so different, that it was futuristic. And I think, the future is always a question of, are we there yet? Are we there yet? We think we're not. But smartphones in Back to the Future, maybe we think we are today, but maybe we think that those smartphones in Back to the Future were a little bit more amazing. Yeah. I think, along the lines of what you're saying, Ben, give it another 10 years, give it another 15, maybe even give it another 30. And I think we'll be a lot closer to Back to the Future that people might realise.
Yeah, absolutely. Even another thing that Tesla's pushing are batteries for houses, which apparently the electricity companies are going to try and block in Australia, or do their best to try and stop. But the idea that you can convert...
They're going to need to.
But, it's amazing. You strap one of these to your house, and if you've got solar panels, it, stores electricity during those times that you don't have a lot of solar going out there. And, if they make this, if they're able to perfect this, then it's possible that you could, I guess, live entirely off of solar energy, which is an amazing thing.
Well, batteries will make it possible to go off the grid, and, that then changes the very nature of the way our society's rolled out. I mean, we're talking about, the future and the past. You go back 100 years, you had to put in poles, you had to put in wires. Today, if we started from scratch, you wouldn't have to do any of that. Everyone would get batteries and panels and windmills or whatever else. And I don't think you construct energy the same way that we have it today. So it's very interesting to see how that will go. Tesla definitely pushing at the forefront of those disruptive technologies, and who knows? I mean, are they the people that are going to come up with a hoverboard?
Well, it's true. I guess the last Tesla connection I wanted to make was I recently watched Tomorrowland, which unfortunately isn't that great a film because it's so uneven and doesn't really, sort of cohere into anything specific. But it does offer this incredible idea of, the Nikola Tesla types of the world coming together and sort of finding another dimension where they can create this amazing world where they're not inhibited by, sort of real world obstacles. And obviously they, you go into this dimension and it's amazing. All this amazing technology, everyone's forward thinking and very modern and always progressive. And it had a lot of, I guess did have a lot of political subtext to it, but because it wasn't able to bring it together, it didn't really have that much of a hit. But I still thought it was interesting to mention that because it kind of, sort of highlights and promotes these types of people and why they're important for our society, that they get their things done.
Well, that's it. And that's the whole story. I mean, even if you look back at, Doc Brown, the whole DeLorean, the flux capacitor, and the ability to time travel, seems like a dream, seems out there, seems crazy, but, when these things actually become a reality, they're not crazy anymore.
Well, that's the thing, smartphones and the ability to carry a computer in your pocket would have been, out there 30 years ago, but now it's not. So
that's right.
Who knows where we'll be in 2045? We'll probably catch up with Back to the Future too by then.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Steve, we're out of time. So thanks again for that. It's good to wax lyrical and nostalgia on such a great period of film culture and history, and also the tie-in with science fiction.
Well, I might have to pull out Back to the Future and watch it again this weekend.
Absolutely. All right, so that's it for our episode today. So don't forget to catch our website, scitechculture.com. You can get all of our links there. You can interact with us on Twitter, Google+, and Facebook, so I'd love to hear from you. And if you think anyone's interested in our regular discussions we have in science, technology, and culture, then feel free to send them to our website. We greatly appreciate that. All right, so that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.